This is Unhurried, and I'm your host, Doug Kyle. You know, life can feel like a race, rushing to the next thing, never time to reflect. But there is incredible value in slowing down with God to take in His perspective, His presence, His pace. Have you ever noticed that the people who appreciate grace the most aren't always the ones you'd expect? Welcome to episode 8 of season 2 of Unhurried. I'm your host, Doug Kyle, along with our producer, Ryan Viramontes. And Unhurried is meant to be sort of like sitting down, having a cup of coffee, discussing the message that we talked about on Sunday morning, kind of a deeper dive into it. By the way, speaking of coffee, thank you for getting me mine this morning.
Yeah, for sure.
Have any trouble ordering that? That was kind of a special order.
Well, it was kind of funny because when I did order it, it's not on the menu.
Right.
Right. So when she did look at me,
It's a salted caramel cortado.
Yes,
Not
yes.
on the menu.
not on the menu, and she did look at me and she was like, okay. And I could kind of tell that I knew the password that she knew,
Yeah.
but then she was like, but how do you know it? You know what I
Right.
mean? Kind of a thing, you know?
Love it.
So I almost dropped your name this
Uh-huh.
morning, but I didn't have
You
I
didn't
didn't have to.
you didn't have to,
Yeah,
but
I didn't
she was
have to.
like, I think I know who you're getting that for.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
What did you get?
I just got a dirty iced chai.
There you
So
go.
with almond milk, you know. So
All right.
yeah,
that
yeah.
Sounds
Nothing
good.
too
well,
fancy.
well, I don't know what if you guys are sipping something at home or if you're on the road or walking. I hear a lot of people tell me they go for a walk and they listen to the podcast. So wherever you are, hope you can just kind of slow down a little bit and take it in. We're in a new studio. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see the visual aspect of this, and there's a new studio. So
Yeah.
that was kind of fun. You put this together. Different. We were using my office, which
Right.
wasn't going to be a long-term solution.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's you know, it takes away from when you're meeting with somebody and then all of a sudden you see like 2 cameras and laptops and
Yeah,
all these
This
sound-
gigantic light.
light.
They felt like, am I going to be? Are we talking or am I being interrogated?
Yeah,
What's happening here?
Sound equipment. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So we're trying this out. So thanks for setting that
Yeah,
up.
for sure.
And here we are. We're looking at this series that's entitled "Jesus Wants to Know," and that's sort of framing our talks here for the podcast. This opening into season 2, and this particular question that we're looking at is Jesus's question: do you see this woman? And it's the idea that it's based on an episode from Jesus' life, super interesting, and the question that I want us to live with that kind of grows out of that story is, do you really have to be bad to appreciate being forgiven? How bad do we have to be to appreciate being forgiven? And we'll get into that a little bit more as the podcast goes on. But last week in the podcast, I mentioned my verbal blunder, the mix up about the food description I
Right.
gave. I apparently was describing. I said I was describing chicken marsala, but
Right.
lots of people pointed out that I was actually describing chicken piccata. I got so much grief about that.
Yes, yes.
Did you hear about it from people?
Well, I did too, because I know a lot of our church family, you know, has either, you know, been in the restaurant business or has waited or, you know,
Yeah.
has done multiple, had worked at, you know, other places that's, you know, catering and all these things. So when you said that you got that one comment, I was like, oh, he's going to get a lot more.
I did. I got so much grief
Yeah,
about that verbal blunder. So if you missed it, I said chicken marsala, but then I described chicken piccata. I was actually was it the fall? I don't know. Or later in the week,
Yeah.
I was sitting. I went to an Italian restaurant. We come in, and I see a young couple from our church.
Yeah.
I won't say their
Sure,
names,
sure.
but you know who they
Sure,
were.
sure.
She sang last week
Yes,
for the
yeah,
first time.
yeah,
So
yeah.
she and her husband were there in the restaurant having Italian food,
Right.
and we greeted them, and then we went over, and then when they left, they came over, and the husband said to me, he goes, I ordered the marsala tonight, but I got something that looked a lot like chicken piccata. And I go, man, really?
Burn. You're like, come on.
Come on, I can't go anywhere now. It's gonna be forever.
Yeah.
My they don't remember what I talked about, but they remember. When you make a mistake,
Yeah,
that
exactly.
you can never forget that.
Let's take it as a term of endearment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Shall we?
they're following along, and they're just kind of joshing you a little bit.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, we are looking at these different questions, and I love the question that Jesus asked this week. It was, "Do you see this woman?" Obviously, that comes out of a very specific context where the Jesus is in the home of a Pharisee having dinner. This woman who has a reputation for being notoriously sinful in the town comes in, washes his feet with her tears. It's just a very dramatic and moving story, actually. And then the Pharisee, was self-righteous. He can't really view this woman outside of that category.
Yeah.
And Jesus does. And then he asks that question to the Pharisee. He says, "Do you see this woman?" And the point being that we need to see people the way Jesus does, and we need to really see them. And so it's men, women, the people in our lives. Do we see people the way Jesus does? How do we see them? And the value, the power of allowing people to truly be seeing who they are, and seeing their value, seeing their worth, seeing beyond the categories, and seeing their potential. And that was really the takeaway from the message on Sunday. And it comes on the heels of me actually doing a memorial service the day before.
Right.
You were there too.
Yeah.
You were helping out with that.
Yeah.
And so you remember this. One of the family members, really the daughter of the woman who passed away, actually younger, than anybody would have liked, passed away. And the daughter was speaking, and she said, that her mother. The thing that stands out is how she always felt like her mother saw her.
Right.
That her mother, she always felt seen and valued and appreciated. And it struck me that really is a legacy trait that we want. This isn't just a small thing, that we cultivate this ability to see people for who they truly are, but it is something that we could mark our lives. It's something that we could be remembered for. Well, today in the parable, in the podcast, though, I want to focus more on the parable, because that was part of the message, but there's so much more there, and I feel like I was able to lean hard into the idea of seeing people for who they are, but I want to focus a little bit more on that, because that's something that we could have gone deeper into on Sunday, and we just didn't have the time.
Right. It was so meaningful when you did say that, just because we had just seen each other less than 24 hours before, and you put that into at the end of your message, and at least I know for the family that was there, and I know for myself and a few other people that were serving at the service, I know how meaningful that was to them, and also for myself too. I didn't know her, but just so that you brought that up, that was really impactful in your message.
Yeah, I think so too. And it was when actually the Saturday, the day of the service, I went up to the daughter and I told her, I said, that really was moving to me.
Very moving.
It really connects what I'm going to say tomorrow. And then I was surprised that they all came to church.
So was
yesterday, because they're from out of town, but they were in town still for the weekend, so they came to church, and I had the opportunity to talk to each one individually and say, here's what I'm planning to say.
Right.
Or I don't want you to be surprised by it, one. And secondly, are you okay with it?
Right.
I definitely won't, if that's going to make you uncomfortable. And just the opposite.
Yeah.
They said, that would mean so much to us if you did.
Yeah.
So it felt like really a nice honoring of their mom as well. But it's funny how sometimes God allows those things in your life, just the right timing, that have that power to really fit into a larger situation that we're involved in. So, well, the parable that Jesus told to this Pharisee, his name was Simon. The parable he told him was about a moneylender who loaned money to two individuals. One was a huge amount, 500 denarii, which which my research, I think people, estimate different ways, but probably around $75,000 today.
Yeah.
And the other was 50 denarii, which might be $7,500 today. So very large difference, both big amounts, but one much bigger than the other, one 10 times bigger than the other. And then in the parable, as Jesus told it, both of them were surprisingly forgiven by the moneylender, which, that doesn't happen very often,
No,
right?
it does not.
So that was that alone was pretty surprising. And then Jesus's question, coming out of the parable, to me was even more surprising. He said, who will love the money lender or the forgiver more? And to me, the part of that question that was so surprising is the word love. Because we don't love our money lenders. I don't love my bank. My bank, loan me money to buy a house. I don't love them for it.
That's a strong word.
Yeah, and they probably, even if they forgave me, that would be that I don't never see that happening. But
Right.
if they forgave me the debt, I still probably wouldn't love them.
Right.
I would be their biggest fan.
Sure.
I would, what do you want me to do? Sign a little, I don't know. Take a quote from me about how much I appreciate them. I'll be on a commercial, whatever you want me to do. But I don't love them for it. And so when Jesus said the word love, it certainly must have caught everybody a little bit off guard. I'm sure even back then you don't love your money lender. In some ways you want to distance yourself from them, like get it paid off and never see them again, rather than, have this loving relationship. But his point is that this notoriously sinful woman who came in and washed his feet was showing this deep expression of love to Jesus, and he wanted that to be highlighted with the word love. And then Simon, the Pharisee, in contrast, was showing very little love, if any, towards Jesus. It was pretty clear this dinner wasn't because, hey, I want to hang out and get to know you better. It was sort of like, I want to, maybe judge you or find a way to trap you. Or, it was purely functional. It wasn't relational. And Jesus is kind of bringing that out in the parable. And so he ends with the punchline. The punchline is this. He says, to the one who is forgiven much, loves much. And so again, the idea of love. And love now is linked to really understanding and appreciating our forgiveness. And to me, I think that's sort of like one of those teachings of Jesus that can be taken the wrong way. We can sort of feel like, well, we're only going to love Jesus a lot if we have a lot to be forgiven of. And if in my estimation, my sins are kind of mild compared to, the drug dealers of the day or the assassins or, whatever, some really, horrendous sin, then I'm not there. If they're forgiven, they're going to love Jesus more than I'm going to love them. It's easy to think that I have to be really bad to appreciate being really forgiven. And so, and that's, certainly in the parable, the Simon, the Pharisee, thought he was pretty good. He was definitely the small debt guy in the parable. And and she, this woman who came in, she was the big debt person. She was the one that owed so much. And so I'm wondering if, the other Pharisees in the room or Simon himself go, well, that's not fair. If I can't love God so much because I'm a pretty good person. And does that mean, this is ridiculous, but does that mean, well, I guess I better go out and do a lot of really, really bad things and then get forgiven of that. And that way I will appreciate.
Sure. I got to get some sins and then I can be forgiven more.
Yeah. Which I say that's ridiculous, but I bet some people have thought that. Have kind of taken advantage of. Paul said the same thing. Should we just sin all the more that grace would abound?
Exactly.
So I guess people have probably come to that conclusion. I guess if forgiveness is all inclusive, covers everything, go ahead and
let's let it rip.
let's live it up, live it up. And so, is that what Jesus meant us to take from this? Well, I think the answer comes in asking this question, and I hinted at it in the message, but this is great to be able to talk a little bit more about this in the podcast. The question is, when you look at Simon the Pharisee and this woman that washed Jesus' feet with her tears, who is the bigger sinner? Which one needed to be forgiven more?
Yeah.
Clearly, in Simon the Pharisee's mind, it was her.
It was her.
She was the notorious sinner. He was the, probably had a couple of flaws. I mean, nobody's perfect, but was pretty squeaky clean.
Right. Well, and viewed as in the community as someone who's being kind of somewhat squeaky clean. You know what I mean? Like
exactly.
At that time, I mean, he was right on the top. You know what I mean? As far as being able to speak into other people's lives of saying, hey, you got to fix that, or, where he himself was kind of held to a higher standard, but also most likely lived up to that standard.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great point. I mean, everybody around would have come to the same conclusion.
Yes.
Everybody in that town would have said, he's the one that's a small dead guy. She's the big dead guy.
Right.
That's just what people thought.
Right.
In that culture, and let's be honest, we do too.
Totally.
We'll think we put certain people on a pedestal and say they're pretty good, and then we put other people like they're the worst. They're horrible.
Right.
And in our mind, we usually like to put ourselves in the good category.
Right.
And then put what we would never do.
Right.
Whatever that is in the bad category.
Right.
So you're right. That was exactly the perception of the day as well. But the question we have to ask from Jesus's perspective, which one actually was the one that needed to be forgiven more? Was it the woman who saw her sin and was there just lavishly pouring her love and affection and adoration on Jesus because, as Jesus seems to indicate, she already understood her forgiveness?
Yeah.
She understood that she was forgiven and she was responding with love? Or was it the guy who was so self-righteous that he was filled with pride, looking down on people in the community, especially this woman, looking down on Jesus? Becomes clear in the passage. Jesus, the only one that was perfect in the room, looking down at him and not able at all to see his own sins and his own failures. Which one is the bigger debtor? And I feel like in Jesus' mind, in God's mind, the answer is both.
Yeah.
The answer is there. We fall into a trap when we start ranking sin.
Yes.
We start saying, well, this one is really bad. This one's no big deal. God obviously understands and gives me a pass on that one. When we start ranking sins, we're in trouble because the Bible says all of us have sinned.
Right.
Fall short of the grace of God. And we all need his love and forgiveness. We all need everything. There's none of us that live up to it. And even the smallest imperfection and flaw is enough to separate us from a holy God.
Yep.
It really is linked to how holy God is and not how sinful we are. And that gap is, it's like the Grand Canyon.
Yes.
And maybe I have 1 inch better than you, and you have 2 inches better than me or whatever, but we're talking inches compared to miles.
Right. My mom would always say that too, growing up, to us, that there's no ranking system. There's no, kind of like, oh, well, I didn't sin that much. Right. Sin is a sin. Like, you just got to call it what it is, and we all have them.
Yeah. And I think the message here for us is we need to see ourselves honestly.
Yes.
We need to see ourselves honestly as those who have fallen short of our need of forgiveness, or need of grace. And the problem with the Pharisee is probably something that all of us are susceptible to, and that is self-righteousness.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is I feel like in the spiritual journey with God, as you progress, as we move forward, some of the more notorious sins, the big ones, the headline sins, what C.S. Lewis calls the warm sins, the ones that are kind of make the headlines as the bad stuff, those tend to go away for most people as they walk with the Lord. We tend to make some progress
Right.
in eliminating that from our life. But the one sin that seems to get worse is self-righteousness
Yeah.
and pride.
Yeah.
That's the one that doesn't, instead of getting better,
Right.
can easily get worse in our lives.
Yeah.
Because those other things are going away, and because we believe we live the same way. Your point, the culture viewed it back then is the same way the culture views it right now. Oh, I'm no longer in that notorious category.
Right.
So therefore, I'm pretty good. I'm the small debt guy. We feel like we're paying off our debt more and more to God.
Yeah.
We bought into the idea that we have to pay it back. And now, I don't have that much left on my mortgage. I don't have that much left on my spiritual debt.
Right.
I'm pretty good. And in reality, we could be getting, our debt could be getting bigger because our pride is swelling.
Right. Well, and it's also the same, not like, we're not ranking sins, but the self-righteousness, the pride is what we talked about a few weeks ago on the podcast, was that it pulls us further away from God, right? The other sins, I feel like you can kind of, your shortcomings, and where Jesus can step in, right? But the pride issue, that's something that will just always be there, no matter what we're doing, and it can pull us further away.
Yeah, that's kind of Jesus's point, right? You love less.
Yes.
We are loved because let's be honest, because we're loving ourselves more. we're and there's nothing.
It's true.
I mean, I don't want to be misquoted here because we are supposed to love ourselves, love our neighbor as ourselves. But when we have this head swelling kind of love that thinks I'm better than others, that's what's cancer.
Right. It's dangerous. It's very, very dangerous, and it happens to all of us. At some point in our life, and also people who serve in ministry too. That is danger. I've seen a lot of close friends, kind of go, by the wayside because people are just, boosting them up so much that they, fall really, really hard.
Yeah. Well, you're right, because the Pharisee was in a religious kind of a very similar to ministry today.
Yes.
Kind of that role that's looked up to. And so there's a real temptation to sort of be full of yourself.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I got a great quote that I found. When I say full of yourself, it reminds me of it. It's not C.S. Lewis.
Oh, wow.
It's not Larry Osborne.
Oh, wow. We have a new person to the pod?
Yeah. So D.L. Moody said, God sends no one away empty except those who are full of themselves.
Nice.
That's convicting.
Yes, it is.
That's good. God sends no one away empty except for those who are full of themselves. And so there's a real danger with self-righteousness, because we start to see we don't really realize that we need forgiveness for that. We think we're doing pretty well, and in some ways, in my opinion, that was the bigger sin between the Pharisee and the woman in that story. In that encounter, that was the bigger sin, and that's the one that we're all prone to. And so I think it really is convicting. I was talking to someone, and they're saying, the thing that this story did is it made us realize how much we were like the Pharisee.
Yeah.
How much that's a part of our lives. And I think this is a lot like, we were talking about the rich young ruler in a previous podcast. We were talking about that. And with the rich young ruler, the idea was that riches were not enough to save you.
Right.
Which, again, would be countercultural, because in that culture, that if you're rich, then God's blessed you. But riches actually were a liability for him because he was trusting in his riches and seeing that. And in the same way, with the Pharisee, we see righteousness can be a liability when it leads to self-righteousness. When you start to think, oh, I'm pretty good, it can be. So again, in that culture, they would have thought the more outwardly righteous you are, the holier you are, you're more pleasing to God. And here's someone who actually his righteous living was actually distancing himself from God.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
isn't that interesting? Riches, righteousness, those things that we would see as signs of God's blessing actually can separate us from God if we don't also have a healthy understanding of our own flaws and sin and failure.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, and you can see where you can fall into that pattern. Well, we go to church and our kids go to church and we do this and we do that, and we're you know raising them up in the way that they should, and then we're living in a very righteous way, a very godly way. We have a godly marriage, and all of a sudden you start to build up this wall, that kind of, you start to exclude the people that are maybe struggling, or maybe don't have what you have, or maybe their sins are a little bit more outward than yours are, and then all of a sudden you start to put up those walls, and that distance just becomes wider and wider.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it is such a subtle tendency.
Yes, for sure.
And we need to always be reminded of how much we were forgiven,
Yeah.
how much grace we needed and need every day.
Yeah.
Right? We
Yeah.
always need that grace. And to me, the danger sign, the warning flag, the red line on the dashboard is when we start to look down at others. When we
Yeah.
start to feel like, oh,
Yeah.
well, I'm doing so much better than that person.
Right.
Because we don't know their story, we
No.
don't know their challenges,
No.
we don't know their background, we don't know all that they had to overcome to get to where they are right now. We only know our own story.
Right. Right.
And someone once said, we might, we're all trying to get to home play. If we use a baseball analogy,
Sure.
we're all trying to get home. And but many of us started out on third base.
Yes.
We
Yes.
started off with all kinds of advantages
Totally.
that allowed us to live a life more, a more moral and
Sure.
and
Sure.
godly life. And there's others that started off on first base,
Right. Right.
or they barely out of the batter's box.
Right. Right.
And
right.
so they've only made it to first, and
Yeah.
we're already on third, and we're
Right.
going, look at us.
Yeah.
Chances for them to get to first was a lot harder for us because we started on third base.
Right. Yeah.
We've taken a
very
couple
much so.
leadoff steps. That's
Right.
all we've done.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we just don't know their story,
Not
and
at all.
so we need to say we need to see ourselves properly, truly, and if we do, we'll see others in a better light as well.
Yeah. For sure. For sure.
Yeah. Well, I hope for our listeners and our viewers, we ask ourselves the question: have I forgotten how much I need God's grace? And if you're listening right now or watching, and you're in a reflective mood, which hopefully the Unhurried podcast allows us to do, to just take a moment and not let this beat you up, but let this actually be a very, wonderful moment for you to just before God, just thank Him for the grace that He's pouring into our lives. I know you and I sense that.
Very much so.
The fact that we get to sit here in front of a couple microphones and talk about the goodness of God
Mhm.
is just an expression of His incredible goodness to us and
Yes,
grace
for
to
sure.
us.
For
That
sure.
we actually have anything to say whatsoever. And like you, then are those who are following along. I want to say how grateful I am for God's goodness and grace in my life. I have been forgiven so much, and if I had any idea, of really, and I guess I won't till I get to heaven, how much the gap was,
Oh,
and
yeah.
how much Jesus covered for me to be able to be seen righteous in His sight.
Mm-hmm.
It would just be humbling, and I think I would look at people in a lot better way,
Oh, for sure.
the way that He wants us to. So hopefully that's happening
Mm-hmm.
for you too. There's probably some ways that it's hitting home for our listeners,
Yeah.
with people in their lives, and so thank you for joining us. Thanks to you, Ryan, for being a part of this conversation. I've said often, people are really enjoying having your contributions, and so am I. This has been a podcast that's connected to a message that I gave on February 23rd, 2025, from Luke 7. It's available on the Green Valley Church podcast or greenvalleychurch.com. So until next time, this has been Unhurried with me, your host, Doug Kyle, and I look forward to talking soon.